All right. Looks like the camera is coming out a little blurry here. All right, we'll fix a camera issue later. Hi, Rana. Good to see you. Let's start with a few moments of meditation. Further emptying the mind. And just kind of taking stock of what's happening, what's coming up. All right. Good to see you from Oslo, Norway. Good to see you here. All right, I'll have to figure out what's going on with this video next time. Doesn't look right, but seems like we're communicating, so we'll start here. So I want to take this time to answer a few of the questions. I've responded to some personally, but it's good to kind of discuss it together. So one question was, what is the point of collective consciousness? Why are we not all born into non-duality? And why go through the charade of life? All right, so what is the point of all this? What is the point of not being born into non-duality? And how even is that possible? So a key recognition here is that what we're calling non-duality, right? What we're calling consciousness, what we're calling the second mind, is here and is the nature of things, right? It's not something that began on a particular date, right? Time itself, the way we think about time, the way we think about past to present to future, about sequence and about linearity, is a first mind phenomenon, right? For that to happen, the identity has to be concretized and lodged, and attention has to serially change for time itself to be a relevant phenomenon, right? Or a prominent phenomenon, right? And that's what's represented in, for example, the cycles of the sun, the cycles of the earth. All that is basically rhythmic patterns, right? Of passing, like around the orbit or the earth turning around its axis one whole time, right? These are patterns of excitation of the second mind, which are seen as they are, as we see them, because of the first mind perspective, right? And that first mind perspective then kind of is entrained with that rhythm, which is what we call the seasons, which is what we call the day, 24-hour cycle, 365-day cycle. All of this is where time comes from. And then we derive time ultimately by dividing that into smaller segments, right? So this entire perspective is from the first mind. It's useful, it's valid, and it is not nearly all of what is here. So from a second mind perspective, the nature is that undifferentiated potentiality. So when we say, why are we not born into non-duality? The case already is that this is the second mind. And the example we can take is that of water, right? We can say water exists. On earth, water exists. A very simple statement. And yet then we can say at a certain time, a waterfall formed, right? At a certain time, a river formed. At a certain time, oceans formed, and their boundaries changed over time as there were shifts on earth, right? Bubbles form within a river, water vapor, clouds, streams, brooks. There's so many forms for water, and the forms are born and the forms die, right? But we can't say that water itself is changed by that. The forms that water takes can be infinite because water just happens to be that flexible, right? But just because the forms are changing, the nature of water itself doesn't change. At a chemical level, we can say it's H2O, right? It's two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. And when you put those together, it's water. And that can be any form of water. So similarly, when we're talking about what is born and what dies, we're talking about first mind phenomena and first mind experiences. And regardless of the presence or absence of these experiences, the nature of the second mind is always here. And it is what expresses, dances, polarizes, refracts as the first mind phenomena. So in this question, when we say, why are we not all born into that non-duality? It is this second mind itself that expresses as birth and death. And why go through the charade of life? Well, in that sense, it's not a charade, right? The feeling of it being a charade is when there's that sense of constriction and restriction of the first mind, which are for so many reasons, right? In society itself, the restrictions that are in society, right? That we should not show our emotions, that we shouldn't be upset, that we shouldn't be sad, that we have to go through this kind of schooling pattern, that we have to learn these subjects, that everybody has to sit in the same room, that then you get a job and then you get married and then you get two cars. All of these restrictions, all of these pre-carved pathways, right? It is this that makes it feel like a charade, right? But if we are able to express what we need to express, then that sense of it being a charade goes away, right? Because now we are no longer limited. Ultimately, we can only be ourselves. And the extent to which we are not ourselves is the extent to which things start to feel like a charade in a negative way. But as that first mind wall comes down, as we act in the world as we need to, whether it's political action, advocacy, taking steps to change the situations around us, as we express in this natural way, then that sense of it being a charade goes away. There can be a sense that it's maybe like a movie or it's like a drama, but that other connotation of it will start to diminish and dissolve as that more complete picture is seen. Solan says, what is the perspective of thinking beyond first mind? Sorry, what is the purpose of thinking beyond the first mind perspective? So the purpose is only if a person feels like there is something more, right? This is not something, not everybody is going to be interested in the second mind, right? Not everyone's going to be inquisitive and inquire into this and experiment. So it's not that everybody has to be interested in this second mind perspective. But the purpose is it's intended for those who are starting to feel that subtler nature, right? Who are starting to recognize that, hey, wait a second, there's much more than the stories that we've been told. There's much more to what I am, what the world is, than the kind of traditional stories. And not just that, this is not something that I have to go get a PhD in to study and to figure out. It's actually all within me, right? For this kind of mind that's starting to recognize these kinds of things, then to give it a kind of scaffolding, this three minds framework is useful. All right. And in case somebody wants to look into this in more detail, I'm just putting the link here. So this kind of scaffolding of the three minds can provide a kind of map and to a certain extent an instruction manual as to how to open up certain windows of experience. And then when a person does that, there's not going to be any question as to what is the use of it or what is the purpose of it. It is self-fulfilling in its own way. All right, so the next question is, can you speak a little more in depth about physical aspects of this transformation we are all going through? So from food to ways to expel excess energy in the body to bring heart, mind closer together. So I will speak a little more specifically. I can speak about my experience, but first, just broadly speaking, I talk about this in terms of the four pillars, right? So on this YouTube channel, there's a playlist called the Foundation of Health and Healing series, and there are a few videos in there talking about the pillars of nutrition, movement, rest, and connection. And very broadly, those are four categories. There's more detail in the videos, but they describe the things that we can do that make a difference, the common everyday things we can do that help in this process of change as this first mind boundary is starting to change, to shift, to become transparent, all of those things, which can be a very difficult time because the sense of identity is changing, the sense of thinking, perception, all of this can start to change. All right. So, but more specifically to answer this, for me, it meant a few things. It meant eating much more plant-based food. I'm vegetarian now. And for me, eating other kinds of food, especially eating meats, would cause more agitation in the mind. Right. So for me, making that change was one. And it's not just about vegetarian or non-vegetarian. It's about, I found higher quality ingredients, right? So less processed food, less heavy, a whole bunch of sauces and all those kinds of things, right? Not to say I don't eat those. I'm not strict in the way I approach this, but the mind just simply shifts and maintains certain ranges more easily when it's fresh fruits and vegetables. That helps a lot. So that's one thing that would fall under nutrition. Then removing unnecessary streams of information, right? There's this kind of conditioning, social conditioning that happens as we grow up, that we all consume the same kind of information and everybody's talking about the same thing. And that's changing a little bit now with these kinds of podcasts and things like that, and everybody talking about their own interests. But generally realizing that just because there's information there, we don't have to consume it. So what is the kind of information that actually nourishes me, right? That keeps the mind in the range, keeps the identity in the range, that's useful to fulfill the responsibilities, to act in life. Those are the kinds of streams of information that I choose. And a lot of the other stuff, like reading too much of the news and watching a whole bunch of videos that are not really relevant or not really serving any use beyond just adding more content into the mind, all those things went away. Right. And that goes with the people that we're spending time with too. Now, this isn't about avoiding all difficulties or avoiding perspectives that disagree with you. I learn a lot from people who disagree with me. Right. I learn to understand and assimilate that perspective in a certain sense. It's just about choosing those streams that are useful for us. So those are things that have helped me. Movement, moving my body through the full range of motion has helped me. So I move all my joints through the full range of motion. I try to do it every morning, but it doesn't happen every morning. That helps a lot, kind of stretching everything out. During the time period where this was very intense, at that time, I was doing massage regularly. I was getting massages regularly, especially Thai massage. I found Thai massage very helpful in ironing out a lot of the tendencies and things that had been stored in the physical structure. right? It's very much because the anatomy that Thai massage is based on energetic anatomy. It's not only based on physical anatomy. So massage helped, moving through the range of motion. What else? Being in nature. That was a big one. So, when we are in environments like I am in now, right? I'm in this room right now. This room is essentially a human thought structure, right? It started in the mind of a person, and this person kind of concretized it through building materials and physicality, and that's what this room is. It's essentially a representation of the human mind, of a modified mind. But when we go in nature, we're going more into the undifferentiated mind, right? It is not the second mind proper per se, but it's still one step prior to the human mind, right? Because the natural surroundings, some version of that is independent of the human being, right? So when we move into nature, that is in a sense, a less complex thought structure. And I mean, in a sense, not complex that it's not incredibly intricate, incredibly beautiful, but that there's less inefficiency. There's no inefficiency. There's no unnecessary redundancy, right? There are no dead ends. Everything feeds into everything else. And that's quite different from human thought structures. So being in nature also helps with this. All of this speaks to the treatment or the addressing or the engagement of that boundary between the first and the second mind. All right. So there are no stupid questions. Is there pain and death? There can be pain and death. It depends on the particular scenario. I can't speak broadly about that. What we can say is that the more that there is identity as the first mind, the greater the chance that there is going to be pain and death, right? And pain specifically, I mean suffering. Pain to some extent, as long as there's the body, there's going to be some kind of pain in different experiences, right? You hit the body somewhere, there's going to be pain. So similarly, at the time of death, there can also be pain. However, the greater that the identity is fully associated, meaning that the more that it is not simply restricted to the first mind, but it has associated more with its original nature as the second mind, to that extent, the suffering can be less because the sense of pain is directly related to the first mind identity. All right, we'll do one more. So does this mean, this is a common kind of question, does this mean nothing I do matters? I wanted to train and help others, but if this is just a dream, then it makes everything seem pointless. So this is not just a dream. Let's just say that right off the bat. We use the dream example often because looking at the mechanics of that can give us insights into the mechanics of this, right? Looking at how the dreaming mind represents itself as space and time, how the dreaming mind represents itself as the characters, as events, as good and bad, as up and down, as gravity, as weightlessness, as outer space and inner space, right? That representational nature or that representational function, that itself can be appreciated in this, what we call the waking state of consciousness. And so it's a tool. Looking at the dream, analyzing the dream is a tool to become aware of another view of what is happening here. It doesn't mean that this is just a dream, right? Because from the dream, we seem to wake up more often, right? And there's a continuity to this other experience that we come into when the mind shifts from the dreaming state to the waking state. So it's not the same. However, there can be parallels, there can be insights that we can glean from looking at that. So absolutely, whatever you're interested in, whatever field you want to pursue, then that naturally has to be done because that is the nature of the first mind, right? This first mind is born and is represented precisely because it has certain tendencies to express. So suppressing those tendencies doesn't make sense. That's going to be painful. It's going to lead to difficulties, right? Rather, it's opening up the view rather than suppressing the view and saying none of this matters. It's really opening it up even more and saying, oh, okay, what I am is not just this. There's much more than this, and let me express these things, right? The whole idea of saying that we cannot express or we should not think this or we should not do that, that tends to cramp the mind and make it hard. And this is what people experience as difficulty later in life, right? Teenage rebellion or midlife crisis or all of these things that we talk about are because of this cramped tendency of the mind, and that freedom has never been there. So absolutely expressing that nature, right? Pursuing what it is that we are interested in. When as this kind of opening happens, then it becomes clear that, okay, it's not so much whether this is a dream or whether this is not a dream. That's why the book back there is called Is This a Dream? It's a question rather than a statement. It's an invitation to explore. And in doing this, we kind of go beyond this definitive statement as to whether this is a dream or whether this is not a dream, which is really secondary to us being ourselves and expressing. All right. If there are other questions, feel free to post them. You can post them even after the live stream, and then we can start to look at them next time. Please do, if you found this useful, please do let your friends know, share with them so they can join us on the next live stream. And otherwise, I will see you next week.